in 2 Samuel chapter 15, where we've been, Absalom, remember Absalom is David's third son, and Absalom has stolen the hearts of the men of Israel, and Absalom is exiling his father, King David, kicking him off of his throne and out of Jerusalem. And we've seen over and over why this happened. It was because of David's sin with Bathsheba for stealing a wife that wasn't his. It was for David's sin with Uriah in killing a man against the code of God. And so God tells David after these events that the sword will never depart from your house, and I will allow evil to penetrate your home. And here we have evil having penetrated David's home as a consequence of David's choice to sin against God, to enjoy that pleasure for that evening with Bathsheba, and to to develop a plan so sinister that it would end in the murder of one of his own mighty men. One of his own 30 mighty men David would put to death because of his own sin. David's own sin. And so here we have another consequence of what David did to himself in bringing the sword into his home and evil into his home. His own son has dethroned him. And in verse 15, or chapter 15, we saw David leaving Jerusalem. Now, why does David leave? Why doesn't David pick up arms? David is in control of the army. Because David knows what God has told him. And David knows that because of your sin, there will be consequence. We're back in fellowship. We're back in intimate relationship. We're back. You're the son that I love. You're the man after my own heart. But because of what you've done, there will be ongoing consequences. You're going to have to live with it. To whom much is given, much is expected. And as I've said, this isn't a God who dislikes David. This is a God who intimately adores his son David, but needs to discipline him to continue honing him into a better and better spiritual man. David's been king 35 years when he walks out of the city of Jerusalem. He has already ruled Israel for 35 years when his son deposes him for a time. But in protection and out of protection for the city of Jerusalem, David decides not to fight Absalom, but to leave instead to protect the priesthood, to protect the temple, the tabernacle, to protect the worship of Israel. David leaves 10 people behind, as we've seen. They'll come into this story in just a few minutes. David leaves 10 of his concubines behind. He had many wives. He had several concubines, a lower type of wife, still legally a wife, but called a concubine. And he leaves 10 of them behind at his palace. Someone has to keep the home because perhaps God will show mercy on me and will restore me to my throne one day, is David's thought. I'm not leaving for good. I'm leaving for today. Perhaps God will bring me back. And so he leaves 10 women to keep the palace. We move into 2 Samuel chapter 16. And now that David's leaving town, who would you expect to start speaking in opposition but the old king's family, Saul's family? Remember, Saul, David's father-in-law, was king before David. God made David king after Saul. But now Saul's family, after 35 years of David being king from the tribe of Judah, now the Benjamites raise up their voices. Saul's people. And that's what we see in verse 16, someone named Mephibosheth. Remember, we talked about Mephibosheth last week. I took you back into the chapters where he was introduced to us. He is King Saul's grandson. He's King Saul's grandson. He is Jonathan's son. He's the one that was crippled in an accident as they were fleeing from the Philistines after the Philistines had killed Jonathan and Saul on Mount Gilboa. They're running for their lives. His maid takes him as a little boy and has some sort of accident and cripples the boy in his feet. But he's still the prince of the tribe of Benjamin. he's still the king's grandson, the old king, King Saul. And so we have introduced early in the story Mephibosheth and his servant Ziba. It says in verse 1 of 2 Samuel chapter 16, here is Saul's family speaking out against David. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, we're talking about David leaving the city of David. I showed you a map, going down into the Kidron Valley, up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, leaving to the east. He's at the top of the Mount of Olives. He's just passed a little beyond the summit of the great Mount of Olives. And behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves of bread. So he's bringing provision. He's not only bringing saddled donkeys for David's men, for David's family to ride on. Far be it from the royal family of David to walk into exile. They'll ride on these donkeys I've provided. And he brings provision for the men, loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a jug of wine. The king says to Ziba, now remember, Ziba is Mephibosheth's servant. He's no relation to Saul. He's a servant. But he has come with these great gifts. And so David asks him, why do you have this? And Ziba says to David, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride. He explains it. This bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for whoever is faint in the wilderness to drink. And David has this nagging question. You're the servant of a great man. Where's the great man? Why hasn't he come out? So David asks him, where is your master's son? Where is Mephibosheth, the grandson of King Saul? Ziba said to the king, and here's where you have to decide. I've made my decision. You can make yours. Is he lying or not? Is Mephibosheth guilty of this or not? Ziba accuses his master, Mephibosheth. He says, behold, he is staying in Jerusalem. For he said, I heard it, King David, you can trust me. Mephibosheth has turned against you. Even though you brought him up and you set him at the king's table to dine with you, and you gave him all the land holdings of his grandfather Saul again, which I have overseen, been the superintendent over for all these years. After all the wonderful things you did for Mephibosheth, to keep a promise to his father Jonathan, he has turned against you this day, king. And he has decided he's going to stay in Jerusalem. And this is what he said. Today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. And I don't believe he said that. As we'll see next week when we get to Mephibosheth, or the week after, coming back into the picture. So is it true or false? We get to decide. We'll have to look at the next verses in the 2 chapters over so you can really make a decision. Hold your decision until we get there. Read ahead. But David has been king, as I said, for 35 years now. Did Mephibosheth, has he really been holding a grudge for 35 years? Does he really have these visions of grandeur as a crippled old man now that God is going to give him the throne of his deceased grandfather Saul? Do you believe it or not? I do not. But in the moment, David did. David is under the most, one at least, of the most stressful events he's ever gone through in his life. His own son has deposed him. He's having to leave his throne in haste. He's having to walk out of the great city of Jerusalem, which he loves. He's having to leave the people of Israel that God anointed him to lead. This is a hard day for him. And the last thing he needs is to have to try to take some event to court and let's bring Mephibosheth in and let's hear from him and let's gather the facts and see if there's any other eyewitnesses who may have heard him say this against me. David doesn't have time, doesn't have effort, doesn't have the soul strength to do that in that situation. You know what? I believe you. Why not? For all the things God has brought upon me because of my sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, if God has considered to bring this into my life also, that Mephibosheth has turned, so be it. Mea culpa, all my fault. So the king said to Ziba, after this great accusation of Mephibosheth, he said, "Behold, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. I'm transferring ownership from this moment forward. If he's moved against me as you said he has, and I believe that he has, because why wouldn't I believe you? Then you take what was his." Ziba answers King David and he says, "I prostrate myself." He bows before David like you would before a king. He says, "Let me find favor in your sight, O Lord my king." So he thanks David. And now we see another member of Saul's family who speaks up against David after 35 years of David being king in Saul's place. Verse 5 says, when David came to Bahurim, he's heading east over the Mount of Olives to the next village. As David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul. So what tribe is he from? Which of the 12 tribes of Israel is he from if he's of the house of Saul? He's a Benjamite. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. It says, and in this city there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera, and he came out cursing continually as he came. So you might wonder, what is this cursing? He is treating David with great contempt. He's speaking things out of hatred toward David. Continuously, over and over. As David walks, Shimei is there walking along, casting insults, breathing hatred toward King David, throwing stones and dust and dirt at King David and his entourage of people as they leave. Verse 6 says, he threw stones at David. Now just imagine this for just a moment. We're talking about the king of Israel. If you got close enough today to President Donald Trump and you picked up stones and threw them at the president, what do you think would happen to you? It doesn't matter who the president is. You don't treat the leader of a nation in this way. It could be the president of Ecuador that came. And if an American citizen got close enough to throw stones at him, there would be serious repercussions. We're talking about the king of God's chosen people, Israel. The anointed king David, anointed by the prophet Samuel himself. After 35 years of reign, this nothing and nobody, this dead dog, as he will be called in a minute, is throwing stones at God's chosen king. The question is, how's David going to respond? He threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men were at his right hand and at his left hand. Who are the mighty men? They're the army, the commanders of the army, the joint chiefs of staff, if you will. And their king is being thrown stones at. They will have a response, just the way our Secret Service would. But will David allow the response to go on? Or will he stop it? One of the most humiliating and embarrassing days of David's life has to be this day right here. But understanding what he has done before the Lord and walking against the Mosaic law, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife, thou shalt not kill, murder. Here we have David 3 out of 10 guilty as charged. And God has brought a serious penalty against him. And he knows it. Shimei said when he cursed, we have an idea of what he was saying to David as this outpour of hatred from the tribe of Benjamin. And this man Shimei went to David and his tribe of Judah. Shimei said when he cursed, get out, get out. Glad you're leaving Jerusalem. It's about time. You man of bloodshed. You worthless fellow. So Shimei is accusing David of murder. It's a man of bloodshed. What we don't know is who Shimei is accusing David of having killed. It's not Uriah the Hittite we're talking about. It's Saul's family. So it's either Saul himself that Shimei holds David responsible for Saul's death on Mount Gilboa, or it's Jonathan, who he would have expected to be the next king of Israel after his father Saul's reign, or it's Ishbosheth, remember the other son of David, of Saul, who reigned for a few years after Saul's death. It was one of these people that Shimei, or all of them, that Shimei is calling David a shedder of blood over. You killed my family. You destroyed the throne that had a rightful place in the kingship over Israel, and you took it from us. You're a worthless man, a man of bloodshed. And then he said this to David. He says, Yahweh the Lord calls him by name, the covenant God of Israel, Yahweh, our Creator. Yahweh has returned upon you. This is God's idea, David. Yahweh has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. It was his rightful place. You stole it. Has a lot of strong things to say. And he said, and the Lord Yahweh has given the kingdom, stripped it from you and given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. And I'm happy about it. You worthless man. You try to get away with that with your president someday. I'll visit you in jail. And behold, Shimei continues, you are taken in your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed. And I'm sure that word, those words right there, cut to the quick of David's soul. I was told by God himself that evil would come into my family. And you have just mentioned that the Lord is doing this to me because of my evil. And what argument do I have to that? I have none. So Shimei here is glad that Absalom will take King David's place. He has a hatred for King David. He just wants David gone. He blames him for the disruption of his people, Saul, the tribe of Benjamin's throne. He blames him for the death of his fellow tribesmen, fellow Benjamites. But even in the Old Testament, I'll ask the question, was he right to do this? Was he right? Was he morally and ethically on godly ground to curse God's anointed king? Was he right or not? Look what the Scripture says. In the codified law, the Mosaic law, the 613 rules that God gave for Israel to live by, to worship Him through, one of those in Exodus 22 verse 28 says, you shall not curse God. That's obvious. But then he adds to that, nor curse a ruler of your people. And here we have Shimei disobeying the Mosaic law of Israel by cursing a ruler of his people. And there needs to be a consequence. It's a law. It's a rule in Israel. You cannot curse the anointed ruler of God's people. And so there is a response, and we see it in verse 9. Remember, as this man Shimei is throwing stones at David and hurling these insults and calling him a man of bloodshed and inviting him to leave and thanking God that he's leaving and invoking the name of God. God told me to do this. God is doing this to you. I praise God for this day. It says that his mighty men were on his right hand and on his left hand, as they would be, protecting the king as he fled Jerusalem. And Abishai speaks up. Now, Abishai is David's nephew. He's David's sister. Here you see the name, Abishai, the son of Tzeruiah. Hard name to say. It's got a T-S at the beginning of it. This is David's sister. She had 3 sons. This is one of them. The other one of her other sons has been killed long before this in a battle. And the other son's name is Yoav. And you know Yoav, he's the commander of David's army. This is Yoav's brother, Abishai. And Abishai simply cannot abide his uncle, the king of Israel, being disrespected in this way. It's against the Mosaic law. Not only is it wrong, not only is it unethical, not only is it foolish, not only is it disrespectful, it's against the law of God. And Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king?" And he just has one request. Let me go over now and cut off his head. According to the Mosaic law, that's what should have been done. Should have been killed for disobeying the law and cursing a ruler of God's people. Abishai is not being hot-headed. He's protecting his king. He's protecting the anointing of God himself and the choice of God's leader, David, who happens to be his uncle. He's right. But David understands that as worthless as this man may seem to be, I believe he probably is a messenger from Yahweh to me and for me on this day. So the king stops him. Verse 10. How many of you have ever eaten, legitimately eaten, a large piece of humble pie? We do things in our lives for which the consequences are set, they're rolling, we can't change them. Oh, I wish I could take that statement back. I wish I could take that action back. But once they're out in the ether, they're out in the ether, and you can't do anything about it. And here's David, and at times we have to eat humble pie as we are shown the error of our ways. And here's David in a horrible way, just horribly embarrassing, demeaning way, being shown yet again the error of his ways. So the king first says to his nephew, Abishai, "What have I to do with you, O sons of Tzeruiah?" Tzeruiah, you try to say it. Every time something happens, these 3 men are ready to pick up arms and start slaying heads. And here we have again one of the sons, one of his nephews, wanting immediately to go and to kill this man by cutting off his head, and David stops him. And he says, "If he curses me, and if Yahweh has indeed told him to curse me, If Yahweh has told him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? I've done it because Yahweh told me to do it. And David recognizes, for my sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, the sword having come into my home, and evil having entered into my home by God's own decree, who am I to say that God didn't do this and send Shimei to throw stones at me as I left Jerusalem? That's David's heart. So again, David knows that all of this hardship is his own fault for his sins. He accepts in this situation that this man may well be telling the truth. That just as Ziba came to tell him an unbelievable truth, that someone that had been shown kindness like Mephibosheth could turn against you, this man down the line in Saul's family, a member of the tribe of Benjamin, that he would come and throw stones at me in hatred, that's unbelievable? That's not unbelievable. Perhaps God sent him to do this. So he accepts that Shimei may well be telling the truth, and he may be speaking the words of Yahweh. A very message that God wanted David to hear. David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my own son who came out from me seeks my life. You think it's unusual that this man, a representative of King Saul's house, has a problem with me? My own son has a problem with me. He says, my son who came out from me seeks my life. Avshalom, Absalom. How much more now this Benjamite? And David says, leave him alone and let him continue to curse me. Can you imagine that? Let him curse me. Because I believe that the Lord God may be doing this, just as he said. Let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him. He believes it. In verse 12 he says, David, perhaps Yahweh will look on my affliction and return good to me instead of this cursing this day. If I don't recognize and humble myself before the Lord in times when I am guilty as charged, if I raise up and say, you can't do this to me, I'm the king of Israel, how dare you, Lord, bring this on me? If I don't walk through this disciplinary hand of God properly, I have no future with this God. He's teaching me, a 65-year-old king who still has not arrived spiritually. God is teaching me through this event. And perhaps if I endure it with humility properly and continue to allow the cursing and the stone throwing and take the abuse, perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and return good to me. At a future date, I may walk back into Jerusalem. Verse 13, so David and his men went on the way, and Shimei went with them on the hillside parallel with them. And as he went, he cursed, and he cast stones, and he threw dust at him, because David continued to allow it. Because David believed that this was God's hand. He's humble enough to understand that he brought all this household strife upon himself. How could my own son, well, that was my fault. God told me that was my fault. God told me that it was my sin and the consequences of my sin that I would live out. So this is my fault. So he understands, and even through this strife, through God using this madman to curse David, to scold David, here we have David maturing spiritually. I'll give you an example in just a minute. 65-year-old king of Israel still needs to mature spiritually, still needs to grow up, still needs to understand how to respond to God. And David here is willing to listen to his enemies because maybe he was being taught a lesson by God. So God uses a madman Benjamite to teach me a lesson, to humble me. Who am I to say that God can't use this Benjamite Shimei to humble me? I need to be humbled. I thought, as the king of Israel, that I could take any woman I wanted, and I stole another man's wife. Does he need humbling? Yes, he does. And I thought that I was above the law. And trying to cover my sin with another man's wife, I had the man killed, but who can touch me, the great King David? Does he need humbling? Yes, he does. And he's accepting the humbling from God here. We can learn a lot from King David. Sometimes God can give us a message of truth through someone that doesn't like us. You ever experienced that? Sometimes God can give us a message of truth through someone that doesn't like us, because often they're the only ones who will tell us the blunt truth. Regardless of their motivation, if God needs you to hear the information, He can use anybody He wants to. Believer, unbeliever, child, elderly, male, female, slave, free man. He can use whoever He wants to deliver a message. And David here is understanding that a message is being delivered. Friends, often as we continue this train of thought, sometimes it has to come through someone who doesn't like you, because friends most often won't tell us things we need to hear. But David is willing to be judged by God, even if God, the judge, in the judging, uses a madman Benjamite to do it. I'll show you another example now, just quickly. Remember in 1 Samuel chapter 25, David is engaged with a man named Nabal. Remember that? Nabal's wife's name was Abigail. I want to show you King David in his maturing process. When David was near Carmel, he sends some men to Nabal, a rich man who was shearing his sheep, a festive time in Israel, a time of celebration, a time when wine flows and the tables are full of food. David says, "My men need some food." And Nabal turned him away. And what was David's response? What was David's response? Kill him. Kill him and every man associated with him. Kill them all. Now you get to this story today, and whose response was that? Kill him. It was David's nephew, Abishai. It wasn't David. Because David has grown from that experience over the years. And David now understands in humility that sometimes God sends messages through people we don't expect them to come through. And in David's humility, instead of declaring that by morning every man associated with Nabal will be killed, and Abigail had to come in and save the day, very interestingly, with her donkeys and her cakes of raisins. Isn't that an interesting thought? So many of the same themes in both of these stories, 1 Samuel chapter 25 and David's harsh, ungodly response, and now 2 Samuel chapter 16, where David's response has been tempered by life, tempered by a growing relationship with God, tempered by the understanding of the horridness of his sin. And in humility, he accepts this madman's stones. He's grown up. He's 65 years old. He's the king of Israel. And he has lessons to learn. And he's willing to learn them in the most embarrassing way possible from a harmful enemy. In humility, David accepts what God gives. Have a long way to go, don't we? Verse 14 says, the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary, and he refreshed himself there. They got to where they were going. Verse 15 says, then Absalom, Avshalom, his son, and all the people, the men of Israel, entered Jerusalem. David leaves. Absalom comes in. And who comes with him but Ahithophel? We learned about Ahithophel earlier. He was David's counselor who changed his stripes and went with Absalom. Who doesn't want to be on the winning team? A political move for sure. But Ahithophel, David's once wise and faithful and loyal counselor, has turned coat and gone with Absalom, the conspirator. In verse 16, the scene shifts. We go back to David's friend Hushai. Remember, David has a friend named Hushai. David has heard that Ahithophel has turned coat and gone with Absalom. And David says, I need a man in the palace. I need information. Hushai, don't travel with me. Go back to the palace in Jerusalem. Make Absalom understand and believe that you will be his friend and confidant and counselor. And feed me information. That's what he needs. We saw that in the last chapter. So here we see how Hushai is received by Absalom. It came about when Hushai the Archite, who was David's friend and is now acting as David's in-house spy, at David's request, it says, now it came about when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king! Long live the king! And you just have to wonder, which king was he referring to? I love the tongue-in-cheek here. I am loyal to God's anointed David. But without saying a name, he can say it with verve and charisma and strength. Long live the king. And I think that he was thinking of his friend King David as he begins this ruse with Absalom. Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend, accepting that you've just said that about me? Why do you not go with your friend? I don't believe that you mean that about me. You and Dad were thick as thieves. And Hushai has to really sell this moment. Hushai said to Absalom, no. For whom the Lord Yahweh and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be. If God has chosen a new king for Israel, if the people of Israel have chosen a new king, then I will support that king, and with him I will remain. Again, one of those, but who is he referring to? Verse 19, he says, besides, whom shall I choose? Should I not serve in the presence of David's son? I was David's loyal king. It's rightful that his son would take his throne after him, so why is it odd that I would serve you? If he was outside of David's family, if he was some enemy that was trying to take David's throne, well, I could see a problem, but you're David's son. There's no problem here. Boy, does he sell it well. As I have served in your father's presence, so I will be in your presence. And so Absalom accepts Hushai and believes his words and allows him to remain a royal counselor. This will save David's life. This event will save David's life because in a very brief time, Ahithophel will give proper counsel for how to defeat this beaten king, embarrassed, humbled king on the run. Ahithophel will give proper counsel. I know how to defeat this right now. And Hushai will come in and say, that's not right. We should do this instead. And Absalom believes Hushai over Ahithophel, and it saves David's life. Doesn't God move mountains? Absalom said to Ahithophel, the counselor, who seems to be loyal to him now, who's turned coat against David, Absalom said to Ahithophel, give your advice. What shall we do? My father's on the run, weary, lacks provision. And Ahithophel gives his advice. Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines. Remember, he left 10 behind. Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself odious to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will also be strengthened. So as a first order of business, go sleep, have intercourse with all of your father's remaining concubines, and it will show Israel. It will be a testimony to all Israel that you are making a claim to your father's throne. Let there be no mistake. You sleep with the king's wives, you're taking the king's place. And so, as God had told David, you did this thing, the theft of a wife, the intercourse with a wife that wasn't your own. You did this thing in private, but I will do what I'm going to do in public. And I will give your wives to someone after you. And here we have it. Exactly what God said would happen in verse 22. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, in the public view of the children of Jerusalem. They pitched a tent on the roof, and Absalom went in to his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. I'll show you the verse here, just a couple chapters before. Thus says Yahweh, this is God speaking to David. He says, after the sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, he says, behold, I will raise up evil against you from your own household. It's happened. Absalom. I'll even take your wives before your eyes and give them to your companion, and he will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You say, Rick, stop. You can't say things like that in church. It's improper. But I remind you, if you go to the top line, who is speaking? He can say whatever he wants to. It's our Creator. And he says to David, you stole a wife and lay with her in private. I'll take your wives. Because in retributive justice, there's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And the punishment fits the crime. And the punishment for this crime, David, will fit perfectly. There are consequences, son. He will lie with your wives in broad daylight. And what do we see here? So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he went into his father's concubines publicly in the sight of all Israel. Indeed, you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and under the sun. Anybody who wants to watch can watch. Oh, the embarrassment. The shame. A 35-year reign reduced to this. Verse 23, the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, Remember, this was David's counselor who has turned coat to David's son, the conspirator Absalom. It just says a word about Ahithophel's counsel and how all Israel admired this man and his counsel. It says the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one inquired of the word of God. Was always right. So was all the advice of Ahithophel regarded by both David and now his son Absalom. If Ahithophel says it, it was considered to always be in line with God's thinking. It's right. It's the right thing to do if Ahithophel says to do it. That's why when we get to chapter 17 next week, it's so extraordinary that with this reputation, that Absalom would hear from Ahithophel, go after David with a select group of men, be very tactical about this, and will take him down today. I personally can get close enough to David. I know how this man thinks. I have counseled him for decades. Let me finish this. That's why it's so unbelievable that the words of Ahithophel, who all of Israel regarded as the very words of God, it's amazing that God can move this mountain. And David's friend Hushai comes in and says, no, Ahithophel's wrong this time. And Absalom says, oh yes, do tell. You're listening to this guy instead of Ahithophel? How does God save David's life? Over and over and over throughout David's lifetime. How many times has Yahweh saved David's life? Yet again we see in 2 Samuel chapter 17. God, remember, as David is leaving, when he finds out that Ahithophel turned against him, David utters a prayer to God. And what's the prayer? Remember from last week? May Ahithophel's counsel be thwarted. So who does this? God does it in direct response to David's prayer request. This man is seen by all of Israel as a voice piece of you, Father. I'm asking you somehow, one time, to make his advice in the eyes of men wrong. And so in chapter 17, God says, simple. You got it. I'll save your life yet again. Watch me do it. Incredible story. Let's close in prayer today. Heavenly Father,